My name is Celia Mendez, and at 36, I finally learned what my own family thought I was worth. $94,700, give or take, a casserole dish. 11 days after we buried Rafael, I drove to my mother-in-law's house on Palo Verde Drive to return her glass baking dish. She'd sent it home with me after the funeral, stuffed with enchiladas I couldn't stomach. I let myself in through the side door the way I always had, and I found the envelope on her kitchen counter. Grand Mutual Life. I knew the logo. The envelope was torn open and empty. Gloria walked in, saw me holding it, and didn't flinch. "You're young," she said, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "You'll remarry. I raised him. That money is mine." Here's what none of them knew. Back in December 2019, Gloria had laughed at me for buying a fireproof lockbox at Home Depot, $34.99. She'd said it was paranoid nonsense. Inside it now were the original policy documents, every bank statement, and a dated letter from the insurer confirming exactly where those checks were mailed. 14 months later, Gloria opened her own mailbox to find a civil court summons with an exhibit list she couldn't explain away. Welcome to the channel. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Please hit subscribe and like this video to find out how that fireproof lockbox Gloria laughed at held every answer. The morning I found the envelope, I brought a casserole. 11 days after the funeral. I remember counting because Mateo had asked me that morning if Daddy was still dead or if he was coming back now, and I had to stop spreading peanut butter and just stand there with the knife in my hands. 11 days. The boys were 4 years old and they didn't understand permanence yet. I didn't know how to teach it to them when I was still learning it myself. The casserole was chicken and rice, the kind with the canned soup and the shredded cheese on top. Gloria's favorite. I'd made it in the green glass dish Rafael bought me at a thrift store in college, the one with the little chip on the handle. I wrapped it in tinfoil and drove the 12 minutes to her house on Palo Verde Drive. And the whole way there, I was telling myself this was what family did. You showed up, you brought food, you kept the lines open even when grief made everyone strange. Gloria's front yard had that overwatered look it always had. The grass too green, the flower beds mulched, and that dyed red bark she ordered by the truckload. Rafael used to joke that his mother would water a rock if she thought the neighbors were watching. I parked behind her white Camry and sat for a minute with the casserole warm on my lap, looking at the house. Same beige stucco, same terracotta tiles on the roof, same wrought iron security door she'd had installed after Rafael's father left in 1998, as if the man might come back and try to take something. I didn't know yet that I should have been the one locking my doors. She opened before I could knock. Gloria always did that, watched through the front window, tracked arrivals like a cat watching a bird. She was 61 then, a small woman with short, dark hair she dyed too black and hands that were always moving, straightening things, brushing crumbs that weren't there. Celia, a statement with a period. I brought food. I held up the dish. The boys are with my sister. I thought we could talk. She stepped back to let me in. And I walked into that house I'd been walking into for 13 years. The same lemon-scented candle on the entry table. The same framed photo of Rafael at his college graduation, cap tilted, grinning. The same cross-stitched pillow on the couch that said, "Familia es todo." Family is everything. Gloria had made it herself. Back when her hands still cooperated, she pointed at it every time she wanted to win an argument. The kitchen was spotless, always was. I set the casserole on the counter and turned around, and that's when I saw it. On the kitchen table, half buried under a stack of sympathy cards and a church bulletin, was an envelope. It was the logo in the corner that caught me. Grand Mutual Life, blue and white. I knew that logo. I'd been the one who called the insurance company from the hospital parking lot, phone pressed to my ear while Rafael slept inside, the cancer already in his bones by then. I'd given them our address, our real address, the house on Sycamore, where we lived for 6 years. But the checks never came to Sycamore. I reached past the sympathy cards and picked up the envelope. Empty, torn open along the top seam, the way Gloria opened everything. Impatient and crooked. It was addressed to her. 622 Palo Verde Drive, postmarked April 4th, 2022, almost 3 weeks after Rafael died. I remember the date because the insurance company had told me the checks would be mailed within 2 weeks of the claim being processed, and I had filed the claim March 18th, sitting at the kitchen table with Rafael's death certificate still crisp and new in its envelope. We needed that money. The mortgage was behind. The hospital bills were stacking up on the counter in a neat white pile I couldn't bring myself to open. The boys needed school supplies for the fall, and I was already calculating how many shifts I could pick up before the daycare costs ate the difference. "Gloria!" My voice came out flat. "Why is this here?" She was at the sink, filling the kettle. Her back was to me. "Why is what where?" "The envelope from Grand Mutual Life, addressed to you." She didn't turn around. The water kept running. "Oh, that. Rafael changed the address before he passed. He wanted me to handle the paperwork for you. You had enough on your plate." I stood there with the empty envelope in my hand, and I felt something shift. Anger came later. This was quieter, something cold and still, like the moment when you feel the first tickle in your throat and you know you're getting sick. Rafael didn't change the address. I knew that because I was the one who sat with him at the kitchen table the week before he died, going over every document, every account, every password. He could barely hold a pen by then. If he'd changed the address with Grand Mutual, I would have been the one dialing the phone. "The checks," I said. 2 checks, $50,000 and 44,700. Did they come here? The kettle clicked off. Gloria turned around, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and her face was so calm it made my stomach drop. "Yes," she said, "they did. And I cashed them to cover what you owed me." I set the envelope back on the table, carefully, like it was evidence, which I suppose it already was, even if I didn't know it yet. "I don't owe you anything, Gloria." She smiled. It was a terrible smile, patient and pitying, the kind you give a child who doesn't understand math. "Galia, mija, Rafael borrowed from me for years. For the house, for the boys, for your car when the transmission went out. I kept track. You think I just gave that money away?" The car transmission. That was 2018. I remembered because the twins had just turned 1 when the old Honda gave out, and Rafael had said his mother offered to help. A gift, he'd called it, $2,400. I'd cried in the dealership bathroom because I was so relieved. "There were no loans," I said. "There was never any talk of loans." "That's what you remember. That's what happened." Gloria folded the dish towel and laid it on the counter. "You were always bad with money, Celia." Rafael told me. The credit cards, the overdrafts. He protected you from a lot, and I protected him. That's what mothers do. The credit cards. I had one credit card, a Visa, with a $1,500 limit. And Rafael and I used it for groceries the month he was between jobs, in 2018. We paid it off by Christmas. Gloria knew about it because she'd come over unannounced and seen the statement on the fridge, pinned under a magnet shaped like a taco. And she'd shaken her head and said nothing. I had no overdrafts. I worked in hospital billing. I knew exactly where every dollar went. But I didn't say any of that. I stood in her kitchen with the lemon candle burning and the green casserole dish on the counter and the empty envelope on the table. And I understood something for the first time. This was a story she had already told herself and everyone else, long before I walked through the door, the irresponsible daughter-in-law, the grieving mother who had to step in, the money that was rightfully hers. I picked up my keys. "The casserole needs to be refrigerated," I said, "after it cools." And I walked out. The green dish was still on her counter when I left. I didn't go back for it. I didn't call. I drove home to my empty house and my sister watching the boys and the stack of hospital bills I still couldn't pay, and I went to the hall closet and pulled down the fireproof lockbox from the top shelf. The one I'd bought at Home Depot for $34.99 the December before the world fell apart. Gloria had laughed when she saw it, called me paranoid, said I watched too many disaster movies. Inside the box were the original policy documents, both signatures, mine and the insurer's. The address on file, our house on Sycamore, not hers on Palo Verde. I also had the dated letter from Grand Mutual Life confirming the checks were mailed to her address, not mine, hers. I sat on the floor of the hallway with the documents spread around me, and I read every page, twice. Then I put them back in the box, closed the lid, and locked it. The lock clicked shut with a sound so small and final that I almost missed it. That was April of 2022. I didn't call a lawyer until June of the next year. Some people thought that meant I wasn't doing anything. Gloria certainly thought so. She called 3 days after I found the envelope, her voice bright and chatty on the voicemail, asking if I wanted the casserole dish back. I still haven't answered that message. The Sunday dinners didn't stop. That was the first thing I noticed. How ordinary everything stayed. How the world just kept turning its little rotations around roast chicken and mashed potatoes and the same beige tablecloth Gloria had owned since 2003. I kept going. That might sound strange, but I needed to see it. I needed to watch her move through her kitchen, pulling plates from the cupboard, asking me to slice the bread like always, like nothing had happened, like my husband hadn't been dead for 6 weeks and his insurance money wasn't sitting in an account with her name on it. She wore a lavender blouse the first Sunday after I found the canceled checks. Lavender. Rafael's favorite color on her. She'd mentioned that at least 4 times over the years. The twins were at my mother's that weekend. I'd started sending them to my mother's more often, not because I couldn't manage, but because I didn't want them absorbing whatever was about to happen. I didn't know what was about to happen yet, but I knew it wasn't for 8-year-olds. Gloria's house on Palo Verde Drive was the same as always, stucco the color of weak tea, gravel yard because she said grass was a waste of water, the screen door with the small tear in the lower right corner that she'd patched with a piece of duct tape 2 summers ago and never replaced. I parked behind her white Camry and sat in the car for maybe 90 seconds, looking at the bougainvillea climbing the sidewall. Rafael had helped her plant that, 2019. He dug the hole himself and complained about the caliche for a week. Inside, the smell of garlic and onion hit me first. Gloria's cooking always announced itself before she did. My brother-in-law, Tomas, was already there, sitting on the couch with a beer, watching a soccer game I didn't recognize. His wife, Elena, was in the kitchen with Gloria. Elena and I bought the lockbox in December of 2019, 2.5 years before Rafael died. Back when I still thought Gloria's opinions about my life were just noise I had to tolerate at Sunday dinners. It was a Saturday. I remember because Rafael took the boys to his brother's house to watch football, and I had 4 hours entirely to myself, the kind of empty afternoon that feels like a gift when you have 2-year-old twins. I went to Home Depot on Coolibra Road to buy potting soil and a new shower head. That was the whole list. Soil, shower head, home buy 2, but I passed the aisle with the safes. The little ones meant for documents and passports and the kind of things you'd grab if the smoke alarm went off at 3 a.m. And I stopped. 3 days earlier, a house had burned down 2 streets over from us. The Garza family. I didn't know them well, just waved at the mailbox sometimes, but I'd stood on the sidewalk with Mateo on my hip and watched the fire trucks pump water into what used to be a living room. The mother, I think her name was Anna, stood barefoot in her driveway, holding a plastic tub of photo albums. That was all she got out. Photo albums and her kids. Everything else was ash. I couldn't stop thinking about the photo albums. She'd had to choose in whatever seconds she had between the birth certificates and the wedding pictures, and she chose the pictures. I understood why, but I also kept imagining what it would feel like to stand in a driveway and realize you'd lost every piece of paper that proved who you were. So I stood in the aisle at Home Depot and picked up a small black Sentry safe. Fireproof for 30 minutes, up to 1,550 degrees. Waterproof. Weighed maybe 15 pounds. It had a key lock, not a combination. I didn't want something the boys could spin as a game and accidentally reset. The price tag said $34.99. I set it in the cart next to the bag of Miracle Grow and didn't think about it again until I was home, sliding it onto the top shelf of our bedroom closet behind Rafael's winter boots. I put our marriage certificate inside first, then the boys' birth certificates, our passports, the deed to the house, and the life insurance policies, the 2 we'd taken out through Grand Mutual Life when the twins were born, because Rafael said if anything ever happened to either of us, the other one shouldn't have to worry about money while they were grieving. His words. I remember him saying that at the kitchen table, filling out the paperwork with a pen that kept running out of ink. The primary policy was $50,000. The secondary was $44,700. We named each other as beneficiaries. We signed both forms, his handwriting slanted and hurried, mine small and careful. I put the original documents in a manila envelope and slid the envelope into the lockbox, and then I forgot about the whole thing until the following Sunday, when Gloria came over for dinner and saw the box sitting on the kitchen counter. I'd pulled it down that morning to add our tax returns from the previous year, and I hadn't put it back yet. She tapped it with a fingernail. "What's this?" "Fireproof safe," I said. I was stirring beans at the stove. "For important papers." "You think this house is going to catch fire?" "The Garzas didn't think theirs would either." She made a sound. Not quite a laugh. More like a puff of air through her nose. "Celia, you watch too much news. Nobody's house is burning down. You're just paranoid." Imash, paranoid. That was the word she used. I remember it exactly because I remember thinking keeping records isn't paranoia. It's believing the world will keep turning and you'll need proof of your place in it. But I didn't say that. I just smiled the way I always smiled when Gloria said something designed to make me feel small, and I carried the lockbox back to the bedroom while she settled herself at the table and started telling Rafael he should get his cholesterol checked because he looked puffy. Rafael caught my eye as I walked past. He mouthed, "Sorry," and I shook my head slightly. It wasn't his fault. It was just Gloria being Gloria. And I'd learned years ago that arguing with her was like punching water. A lot of effort, and you end up exhausted and wet, and nothing changes. But here's what I didn't know then. What I couldn't have known: that lockbox would outlast Rafael. That the papers inside it would become the spine of my whole life. That Gloria, who mocked me for buying a $34.99 safe at a hardware store, would one day sit across a conference table from my attorney and try to explain why she was entitled to money she'd never earned from a son she'd never really seen. I've thought about that Sunday a lot since. The way she tapped the metal lid like it was a toy I'd bought with her son's money. The dismissal in her voice, the casual contempt. At the time it stung, but only a little, the way a paper cut stings, sharp and then forgotten. Now I understand it differently. Gloria was showing me something. She was showing me that she believed my caution was weakness, that preparation was fear, that keeping records was something only a suspicious person would do, and she, generous, open-handed Gloria, would never need such things because she was a good person, and good people don't have to prove anything. I read something a few years after all this. After the deposition and the settlement, when I was trying to understand how a woman could look her dead son's wife in the face and lie about money. There's a term for it, or a framework anyway: cognitive dissonance. The mind's ability to hold two contradictory beliefs at once and simply edit out the one that's too painful. Gloria believed she was a devoted mother. She also believed she deserved $94,700 that belonged to me and the boys. And instead of letting those two facts collide and break something, her brain just rewrote the story. Rafael owed her. She'd loaned him money. She was only taking back what was hers. It wasn't theft if she was the victim first. I don't know if that's true. I'm not a psychologist. But it helps me sleep at night thinking that maybe she actually believes her own version. That she's just a woman who broke something and can't admit it. Anyway, the lockbox sat on the closet shelf behind Rafael's boots for 2 years. Through the pandemic, through the diagnosis, through the months of chemo and the weeks of hospice, and the night I came home from the funeral home with a folder full of paperwork and nowhere to put my husband. In April 2022, when the checks arrived, or didn't arrive, depending on whose mailbox you were watching, I went straight to that closet. I pulled down the box. I unlocked it with the little silver key I kept on my keyring. And I found the original policy documents still in their manila envelope, still crisp, still bearing both our signatures in blue and black ink. Gloria didn't know I had them. She'd forgotten the lockbox existed, if she'd ever really noticed it at all. To her, it was just another piece of Celia's paranoia, a punchline from a Sunday dinner 3 years ago. But I had the policies, I had the marriage certificate, I had the boys' birth certificates, I had the deed to the house, I had everything. And Gloria had a story that kept changing. I remember the exact weight of my keys in my hand the morning I drove to the post office. It was a Tuesday, early April 2023, just over a year since Rafael died. The boys were at school. I had taken the morning off work. I told my supervisor I had a personal errand, which was true, and she didn't ask questions because I never gave her reason to. The post office on Craycroft Road still had that smell, paper and floor wax, and something faintly metallic. I stood in line behind a man mailing a guitar in a hard case, and an elderly woman with a stack of greeting cards she wanted hand-canceled. When my turn came, I asked for a certified mail form. The clerk, a woman about my age with butterfly clips in her hair, slid one across the counter without looking up. I filled it out slowly. Grand Mutual Life Insurance Company, Claims Records Division. I had the policy numbers memorized by then. I requested certified copies of all claim documents, all disbursement records, and the mailing addresses on file for both policies. I paid the $7.40 for postage and the return receipt. The clerk stamped it, tore off my portion of the green card, and dropped the envelope into the bin behind her. Then I went home and waited. Waiting is a skill you develop when you're a hospital billing specialist. I spend 8 hours a day on hold with insurance companies, listening to hold music that sounds like it was recorded underwater in 1994. You learn to breathe through the waiting. You learn not to clench your jaw. But this was different. This was my own life sitting in some claims adjuster's inbox, and I checked the mailbox every afternoon like a teenager waiting for a college acceptance letter. The envelope came 11 days later. Standard business envelope, white Grand Mutual logo in the corner, a stylized oak tree with roots spreading underneath. I saw it sitting on top of the stack of bills and grocery circulars, and I didn't open it right away. I carried it inside, set it on the kitchen counter, and made myself a cup of coffee first. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to feel like I was still in control of something, even if it was just the timing of when I read my own bad news. Or maybe I already knew what was inside, and I was giving myself a few more minutes of not knowing for certain. The coffee was too hot, and I burned my tongue. I sat down at the kitchen table, the one Rafael and I bought at a garage sale in 2015, and refinished together, sanding the oak down to something pale and clean. I remember he got sawdust in his eyebrows, and I laughed so hard I almost fell off the porch. That table had seen birthday cakes and homework assignments, and one very unfortunate attempt at homemade pasta that glued itself to the surface. It had seen our whole life. I opened the envelope. The letter was one page. Grand Mutual letterhead dated March 28, 2023, addressed to Celia Mendez at my home address. The body of the letter was brief, maybe 6 sentences. It confirmed that 2 life insurance claims had been processed following the death of Rafael Mendez. Policy number ending in 2847, primary policy, benefit amount $50,000. Policy number ending in 6193, secondary policy, benefit amount $44,700. Both claims approved and paid. Disbursement date April 4th, 2022. Checks mailed to the beneficiary address on file. 622 Palo Verde Drive, Tucson, Arizona, 85710. Gloria's address. I read it 3 times. The first time fast, scanning. The second time slow, letting each sentence land. The third time out loud, quietly, to the empty kitchen, because I needed to hear the words in my own voice to believe they were real. The beneficiary address on file. I had never lived at 622 Palo Verde Drive. I had never given Grand Mutual that address. I had never changed the address on those policies because I didn't even know they existed until after Rafael died, when I found the paperwork in the bottom drawer of his desk, the drawer he always said was just old tax returns and warranty cards. But Gloria's address was on file. Gloria's address was where the checks went. I set the letter down on the table and pressed my palms flat against the wood. The grain was smooth under my hands, years of use polishing it to something soft. I thought about Rafael filling out those beneficiary forms. He must have listed me. I was his wife. I was the mother of his children. Of course, he listed me, but somewhere along the way, the address got changed. Or maybe it was always Gloria's address from the start, and Rafael never thought to update it after we got married. Maybe he filled out those forms when he was younger, before me, and then life happened, and he forgot. I wanted to believe that. It would have been easier to believe that. But Rafael was meticulous about paperwork. He was the one who filed our taxes every year, who kept a spreadsheet for our monthly budget, who set up automatic payments for every bill so we'd never miss a due date. He would have updated his life insurance beneficiary information after we got married. He would have. He told me he did. I remember the conversation, sitting on the back porch in 2014, a few weeks after the wedding. He said, "I changed everything over to you, just in case." And I said, "In case of what?" And he said, "In case of anything," and kissed my forehead. So either he forgot, or someone else changed it. The letter from Grand Mutual didn't say who made the change. It didn't say when the beneficiary address was updated. It just confirmed where the checks went, and that was enough for now. I got up and walked to the hall closet. The lockbox was on the top shelf, behind the spare blankets and the boys' old baby clothes I couldn't bring myself to donate. I pulled it down, turned the key, and placed the Grand Mutual letter inside, on top of the marriage certificate and the birth certificates and the life insurance policies and the deed to the house and the bank statements from the joint account Gloria had tried to access. The box was getting full. I remembered buying it. December 2019, a Saturday afternoon, Home Depot on East Broadway. Rafael was with me. He laughed when I picked it up off the shelf, this squat gray box with a combination lock and a handle that felt heavier than it looked. "What are you protecting? The crown jewels?" he asked. I told him I just wanted a place for the important papers, the kind of thing you don't want to hunt for if there's a fire or a flood. He kissed me right there in the Home Depot aisle and said, "That's my practical girl, $34.99. Best money I ever spent." Gloria mocked the lockbox at Sunday dinner a few weeks later. I'd mentioned it in passing, something about organizing the household files, and she laughed that laugh of hers, the one that sounded like a door slamming. "A lockbox," she said, shaking her head. "What are you so worried about, mija? Someone's going to steal your electric bills?" My father-in-law chuckled. Rafael's sister, Alma, looked at her plate. I didn't respond. I just took a bite of my enchilada and let the silence settle. I think about that moment now. I think about Gloria's face when she said it, the way her eyes flicked to Rafael, like she was checking to see if he was laughing too. He wasn't. He was looking at me with this small private smile, the one that said, "I'm on your team." He was on my team. I have to believe that. I closed the lockbox and put it back on the shelf. Then I went to the kitchen, poured the rest of my coffee down the sink, and called my lawyer. The phone rang 4 times before she picked up. I told her about the letter. I read her the relevant sentences while she listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a pause, and then she said, "I'm going to need a copy of that. Can you scan it and email it to me this afternoon?" I said yes. I said I'd do it right now, but first I stood in my kitchen for a long moment, looking at the table where I'd read the letter, looking at the refrigerator covered in the boys' drawings, looking at the wedding photo still hanging on the wall by the pantry. Rafael in his gray suit, me in my mother's dress, both of us squinting into the Arizona sun, both of us so young, 25 years old. We thought we had all the time in the world. The letter from Grand Mutual was 6 sentences long. It didn't accuse anyone. It didn't explain anything. It just stated facts, clean and plain, like a medical chart listing symptoms without offering a diagnosis. But I had the diagnosis now. I had it in writing. Gloria Vasquez had cashed $94,700 in life insurance checks mailed to her address, and she had never said a word to me about it. She had never offered me a dime. She had never even acknowledged the policies existed. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a door that had been cracked open for months finally swung wide. I didn't do anything with the file right away. That's the part people don't understand when they hear the story later. They want to know why I didn't march over to Gloria's house that same afternoon and slap the bank statements down on her kitchen table. Why I didn't call the police or a lawyer, or at least my sister in Albuquerque, who had been waiting for me to get angry about something since Rafael's funeral. But I was 33 years old with twin 5-year-olds and a mortgage that had Rafael's name still on it. And I worked in a hospital billing department where I saw every day what happens when people make decisions based on adrenaline instead of arithmetic. So I didn't do anything. I closed the lockbox, spun the little dial, slid it back into the closet under my winter boots, and I went to pick up Mateo and Lucas from kindergarten. That was April 2022. I didn't file the lawsuit until June of 2023. 14 months of silence. It wasn't the kind of silence where you're avoiding someone. Gloria and I still talked. We still did Sunday dinners at her house on Palo Verde Drive, the same house Rafael grew up in, the same kitchen where she'd served me store-brand lemonade the first time he brought me home in 2009, and looked at me like I was a problem she hadn't decided how to solve yet. I still sat on her back patio while the boys ran through the sprinklers, and she told me about her neighbor's gallbladder surgery and which cousin was getting divorced. I nodded. I asked follow-up questions. I brought flan from the bakery on Candelaria because I knew she liked theirs better than mine. And the whole time I was building. The first thing I did was request the original policy documents from Grand Mutual Life. The full contracts, the ones with both signatures. Rafael had named me as primary beneficiary on both policies. That was never the question. The question was why the checks went to Gloria's address. And the answer turned out to be embarrassingly simple. When we filled out the paperwork, Rafael put his mother's address as the mailing address for correspondence. He said it was because our apartment mailbox kept getting broken into. I remember him saying it. I remember standing in the kitchen of that little apartment on Cole Avenue, the one with the radiator that clanked all night, and him waving the form at me and saying, "My mom's place is safer. Nobody messes with mail on her street." And I said, okay, because I was 25 and it didn't seem like a detail that would matter. It mattered. The checks were issued on April 4th, 2022. I got that date from a letter the insurer sent me, not proactively, but because I called them and asked. I gave them my policy numbers and my social security number and my husband's death certificate number, and the woman on the phone said, "Yes, Mrs. Mendez, the disbursements were mailed on April 4th to the address on file." She read me the address, 622 Palo Verde Drive. I wrote it down on a yellow sticky note and pressed it onto the corner of my desk. Then I waited for the bank statements. Gloria and I used the same credit union, Sandia Federal, off Montgomery Boulevard, because Rafael had set up accounts for both of us there years ago when they were running a referral promotion. He got $50 for signing me up. I still remember him grinning about it, waving the gift card they sent him. That detail, that stupid $50 gift card, turned out to be the thing that made everything else possible. Now, I didn't have access to Gloria's accounts, obviously. But I had my own statements, and I started watching them with a kind of patience I didn't know I had. Every month, I checked for any deposit I couldn't explain. Nothing came, which was exactly what I expected. The money wasn't coming to me. It had gone to her. The confirmation came in July. I was at work eating a tuna sandwich at my desk between patient account reviews, and my phone buzzed with a notification from the credit union app. I almost ignored it. I get a dozen alerts a day from that app, most of them telling me my balance is lower than I'd like, but something made me open it. It was a notification about a shared account, the joint savings account Rafael and I had opened in 2015, the one we'd been putting $50 a month into for the boys' college fund. After Rafael died, I'd kept it open, but stopped the automatic transfers. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't even looked at the balance in months. The notification said the account had been closed. I stared at it for a long time. Then I called the credit union from my desk phone, shut my office door, and spent 45 minutes on hold while someone in their fraud department traced the transaction history. What they told me made my hands go cold on the receiver. Gloria Vasquez had walked into the Montgomery branch on April 11th, 2022, 7 days after the checks were mailed, and deposited $94,700 across 2 accounts, her personal checking and a high-yield savings account she'd opened 3 days earlier. The teller remembered her. She'd been cheerful, chatty, said something about finally paying off some family debts. The teller had congratulated her. Then, and this was the part that took my breath away, Gloria had used her status as a joint account holder on the college fund. Rafael had added her as a secondary signer back in 2017 when the boys were born, because he said it was smart to have a backup. To transfer the $2,841.37 balance into her new savings account, too. She closed it out, zeroed it. The account that was supposed to send Mateo and Lucas to community college someday, gone. I thanked the fraud department representative. I hung up. I finished my tuna sandwich because I was hungry and because my blood sugar drops if I skip meals, and I couldn't afford to get dizzy. Then I opened a new folder on my computer and named it Gloria. Over the next 11 months, I added to it, piece by piece. I requested a copy of the teller's transaction log from the credit union, which they provided after I filed a formal records request and proved I was a legal beneficiary of the closed account. I printed out every email I'd sent Gloria since Rafael's diagnosis. The ones where I'd updated her on his chemo appointments. The ones where I'd asked if she could watch the boys during his infusions. The ones where I'd thanked her for bringing over casseroles I knew she'd bought at Costco and repackaged in her own glass dishes. I printed her replies too. Of course, Mia. Anything from my boys. You know I'm here for you. I kept a log of every Sunday dinner. Just a note in my phone after we got home. April 17th, Gloria asked about the mortgage. I said I was managing. She changed the subject to her rose bushes. May 1st, Gloria mentioned her new patio furniture, said she got a good deal, didn't say how much. June 12th, Gloria took the boys to the zoo, bought them stuffed animals. Mateo asked why Grandma has so much money now. I said Grandma is just being generous. That one sat in my chest for a week. I never asked her for $1. I never hinted that I knew. I just kept showing up, kept bringing flan, kept letting the boys climb into her lap and call her abuela and tell her about their swim lessons and their loose teeth. I watched her buy new furniture and a new television and take a weekend trip to Santa Fe with her church group, and I said, "That sounds lovely, Gloria. You deserve it." And every time I came home from her house, I added something to the file. By the spring of 2023, I had 47 pages. Bank records, policy documents, the dated letter from Grand Mutual Life confirming the checks were mailed to her address, screenshots of text messages, the transaction log from the credit union, and a timeline I'd built in a spreadsheet with dates and amounts and the names of every teller and customer service representative I'd spoken to. I had the receipt from Home Depot for the lockbox, which I'd bought in December of 2019. Back when Gloria had come over for Christmas and seen it on my closet shelf and laughed. "What are you, a spy?" she'd said. "Who needs a fireproof box in a rental?" I remember looking at her that day and thinking, I don't know yet, but I might. In May of 2023, I called a lawyer. Her name was Patricia Okonkwo, and she worked out of a small office on 4th Street near the railroad tracks, and she had a reputation for handling probate disputes without making a spectacle. I brought her the file in a banker's box, all 47 pages, organized with labeled tabs, and she sat at her desk and read through the whole thing without speaking. When she finished, she closed the folder and looked at me over her reading glasses. "Mrs. Mendez," she said, "you have been very patient." "I have twin sons," I said. "I don't have the luxury of being impatient." She nodded slowly, like she understood something I hadn't said out loud. Then she pulled a legal pad toward her and uncapped a pen. "Let's talk about what you want," she said. "Not what you'll settle for. What you want." I told her exactly what I wanted, the acknowledgement first, not the money. A legal finding that Gloria Vasquez had knowingly converted funds that did not belong to her. The money mattered, of course. I had 2 boys who needed college funds and a mortgage that still had 17 years on it. But what I wanted, what I had carried in my chest like a stone since April of 2022, was for someone in a position of authority to look at the evidence and say the words, "This was wrong." And she knew it. Patricia Okonkwo wrote it all down on her yellow legal pad. She didn't nod sympathetically or make soft sounds of agreement. She just wrote, her pen moving in quick, efficient strokes. When I finished, she looked up and said, "I'll need copies of everything." "I have them," I said. "Originals?" "I have those too." She smiled then, a small thing that barely moved her mouth. But I saw it. You'd be surprised how many people come in here with a story and no paper. I didn't tell her about the lockbox, not yet. I just said, I worked in hospital billing for 9 years. Documentation is the only thing that ever saved anyone. That was the first meeting. There were others after that. Phone calls, emails, a formal retainer agreement I signed in her office on a Thursday morning while the twins were at summer day camp. Patricia charged $350 an hour, and I paid the initial retainer of $5,000 from the savings account I'd been feeding $10 at a time since the month after Rafael's funeral. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start. The demand letter went out first, dated July 14th, 2023, sent certified mail to 622 Palo Verde Drive. It laid out the facts, the 2 policies, the joint beneficiary designation, the checks mailed to Gloria's address, the forged endorsements, the total sum of $94,700. It gave her 30 days to return the funds in full. Gloria didn't respond. Patricia wasn't surprised. People who cash dead relatives' insurance checks aren't usually the type to write a polite reply, she said on the phone. We file next. I remember the day we filed, August 9th, 2023. The twins had just turned 6, and I'd made them a cake from a box mix, chocolate with chocolate frosting, the kind Rafael used to make for them. We sang Happy Birthday in the backyard with my sister and her kids, and I didn't think about Gloria once. Not until the boys were in bed, and I sat alone in the living room with my phone, scrolling through photos of Rafael from the year before he got sick. His face was still full then, his eyes bright. He was holding Mateo upside down by the ankles while Lucas shrieked with laughter in the background. I let myself cry for exactly 5 minutes. Then I washed my face and went to bed. The complaint was filed in Maricopa County Superior Court on August 14th. Civil case number CV 2023-0942. Cause of action: conversion, unjust enrichment, fraud. Patricia sent me a PDF copy, and I read it 3 times in my cubicle at the hospital during my lunch break. The language was formal and precise, the kind of legal writing that strips emotion down to its skeleton. But underneath all those paragraphs and numbered counts, the story was the same one I'd been living for 16 months. Gloria was served at her home on a Tuesday afternoon in late August. I know this because my sister-in-law Elena called me 20 minutes later, her voice tight and strange. Celia, what did you do? I was standing in the kitchen, stirring macaroni into boiling water. The twins were in the living room, watching a cartoon about a dog who solves mysteries. What did Gloria tell you I did? Elena hesitated. She said you're suing her. She said you're trying to take her house. That's not true, I said. I'm suing her for the insurance money she stole from me and the boys. The house has nothing to do with it. Stole? Elena's voice went up half an octave. She said Rafael owed her. She said she told you that. Elena, I said, and I kept my voice very calm. Did you ever see any loan documents? Did Rafael ever mention owing his mother money? Did you ever hear a single word about this before he died? The silence on the other end of the line was long enough that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. No, she said finally. But nothing. There were no loans. She made it up. I didn't tell Elena about the lockbox. I didn't tell her about the bank statements or the policy documents or the letter from Grand Mutual Life. I had learned by then that information was a currency, and I wasn't spending it on people who hadn't decided whose side they were on. I don't want to be in the middle of this, Elena said. You're not in the middle of anything, I said. You're on the other end of a phone call, that's all. She didn't call again for 3 months. The legal process moved slowly after that. There were filings and responses, motions and counter-motions. Gloria hired a lawyer, a man named Stephen Cordero, who worked out of a strip mall office in Tempe and had reviews on Google that mentioned things like aggressive and won't back down. He filed an answer to the complaint that claimed Gloria had a verbal agreement with Rafael to repay various expenses she'd covered over the years, and that the insurance checks were rightfully applied to that debt. Patricia called me after she read it. He's going to argue implied contract, she said. It's weak, but it's all he's got. Do you have anything that contradicts it? Rafael's bank records, I said. All of them. Every account he had for the last 10 years. There's no record of any money coming from Gloria, and no record of any payments going back to her except birthday and Christmas gifts. Get me copies, she said. All of them. I spent that weekend at the dining room table with 3 years of bank statements spread out in front of me, highlighting every transaction that could be relevant. The twins colored in coloring books beside me, their small heads bent over pictures of dinosaurs and superheroes. Mateo asked me what I was doing, and I told him I was organizing our family's important papers. Like a detective? He asked. Exactly like a detective, I said. The case dragged on through the fall and into the winter. Depositions were scheduled and rescheduled. Discovery requests went back and forth. Gloria's lawyer asked for extensions twice, and Patricia said that was a good sign. It meant they were scrambling. Then, in June of 2024, Patricia called me with a date. Gloria's deposition is set for September 12th, she said. 1 o'clock, my office. I was in my car, parked in the hospital lot after my shift. The air conditioning was blowing on my face, and I could feel the sweat cooling on the back of my neck. Phoenix in June is like living inside an oven. Will I be there? I asked. You have the right to attend, Patricia said. You don't have to. I want to, I said. I want to watch her say it to my face. The summons was formal notice of the deposition. A thick envelope containing the date, time, location, and a list of documents Gloria was required to bring. Patricia mailed it to 622 Palo Verde Drive on June 10th, 2024. I know exactly when Gloria received it because she called me. It was a Tuesday afternoon, June 12th. I was off work that day, and I was in the backyard with the boys, filling a small plastic pool with the hose. The water was cold and the sun was hot, and the twins were shrieking with that particular joy children have when summer stretches out in front of them like a promise. My phone rang. I didn't recognize the number at first. It was Gloria's landline, which I'd deleted from my contacts months ago. But I answered anyway, because I always answer unknown numbers. It's a habit from the years when Rafael was sick, and every call might be a doctor with test results. Celia. Her voice was high and tight, the way it got when she was working herself up to something. I'd heard that voice 100 times before, at family dinners, on holidays, in the hospital waiting room during Rafael's last weeks. It was the voice of someone who believed her emotions were the most important thing in any room. Gloria, I said. I turned away from the boys and walked toward the patio, the hose still running in my hand. You think you can do this to me? After everything I did for my son? After everything I did for you? She was screaming by the end of the sentence. I could hear the paper rustling in her hands, the thick legal envelope Patricia had sent. I pictured her standing in her kitchen with its yellow tile countertops and the rooster figurines she collected, her face flushed red, her reading glasses pushed up into her gray hair. Gloria, I said, and I kept my voice exactly level. I'm not going to do this on the phone. You're a liar and a thief, she said. You're trying to take money that belongs to me. My son wanted me to have that money. He told me. Rafael signed a beneficiary form, I said. It has both our signatures. The insurance company has the original. He didn't know what he was signing. He was sick. He signed it in 2019, I said. He wasn't sick in 2019. There was a pause. I could hear her breathing, ragged and uneven. In the background, the twins were splashing in the pool. Mailed to 622 Palo Verde Drive. I touched the letter first. It was the oldest piece of paper in the stack, and I wanted to feel the weight of time. The letterhead was cream-colored with a faint watermark I could see when I held it up to the bedroom lamp. Grand Mutual Life, our policy numbers printed in the upper right corner, 2 strings of digits I had memorized without meaning to. Rafael's name, my name. The date stamp on the envelope flap, faded but legible. April 6th, 2022. I read it again, slowly, the way I'd read it 100 times before. Dear Ms. Vasquez, enclosed, please find 2 checks in the amounts of $50,000 and $44,700, representing the full death benefit payable under policies. The sentence trailed into boilerplate, but the numbers sat there, solid and black on the page. $94,700. Mailed to Gloria's house, not mine, because Rafael had listed his mother's address as the mailing address for the policies years before we married, and neither of us ever thought to change it. We thought about it once. I remembered sitting at this same kitchen table in 2016. Rafael said he'd call the insurer on Monday. Monday came and went, and then Mateo had an ear infection, and then Lucas started walking and the phone call never happened. A small oversight that became a door left open. I set the letter down and picked up the bank statement from May 2022, Gloria's checking account at Desert Southwest Credit Union, account number ending in 8417. I'd obtained it through discovery 6 months after I filed suit, and when my attorney handed me the printout in his office on a Tuesday afternoon in January, I stared at it for a full minute without breathing. 2 deposits. April 11th, 2022, $50,000. April 14th, 2022, $44,700. 3 days later, a withdrawal of $12,000. A week after that, $8,500 to a car dealership in Tempe. By the end of May, the balance was down to $31,242. Gloria had spent more than $60,000 of my son's money in under 2 months. I put the bank statement on top of the letter and squared the edges with my fingertips. Then I added the original policy documents, the ones that showed I was the sole primary beneficiary. Rafael filed the initial paperwork at 24 before we were married and after the wedding. In 2014, we updated the beneficiary designation together. I found the forms in the bottom drawer of his desk a few weeks after he died, and I recognized his uneven scrawl beside my own signature beneath it. That fact had never changed. Gloria was never listed, not as beneficiary, not as contingent, not anywhere. She knew this. She had to know this. And yet, she took the checks and cashed them anyway, telling the rest of the family that Celia owed her money, that Rafael had borrowed thousands over the years and never paid her back, that this was simply settling accounts. The loans never existed. I knew it. Rafael's sister Elena knew it. Even Gloria knew it somewhere underneath the story she kept telling herself. But saying it out loud would have meant confronting the truth, and Gloria's family had spent decades perfecting the art of not doing that. I stacked everything together, placed it back in the lockbox, and closed the lid until the latch clicked. Then I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at the box itself. Black, heavy for its size, with a silver keyhole and a carry handle that felt too sturdy for something I'd bought on a Saturday afternoon in December 2019. $34.99 at the Home Depot on Baseline Road. Gloria was with me that day. I remembered suddenly. We'd gone to buy a new garbage disposal, and I picked up the lockbox on impulse at the end of an aisle. Gloria laughed at me in the checkout line. "What do you need that for, Celia? You hiding gold bars in that little house of yours?" I smiled and said something about important papers, and she shook her head and turned away, already bored with me. That box had become the central exhibit in my case against her. My attorney, a woman named Diane Okonkwo, who wore tortoiseshell glasses and never raised her voice, called it Exhibit C and handled it with more respect than Gloria ever showed me in 13 years. At the deposition, when I placed it on the conference table and opened it, Gloria's expression shifted. I watched it happen in real time. Her mouth tightened, her eyes flicked to her own attorney, and for one brief second, she looked afraid. Not guilty, not remorseful, afraid, because she understood, finally, that I had been keeping track. I put the lockbox back on the closet shelf and turned off the bedroom light. Through the wall, I could hear Mateo shifting in his sleep, the faint creak of his bed frame. Lucas was silent. They were 7 now, long-limbed and full of questions, and they had stopped asking about the money only because I'd stopped mentioning it in front of them, but they knew something was wrong. Kids always know. The kitchen table accounting happened on a Saturday in late September 2024, 3 weeks after the deposition and 2 weeks before the trial was scheduled to begin. I didn't plan it that way. My attorney had advised against any contact with Gloria outside of formal proceedings, and I had followed that advice for 16 months. But Gloria showed up at my door at 9:30 in the morning without calling, without texting, wearing a lavender blouse I recognized from a family barbecue in 2018, and asked if she could come in. The boys were at my sister's house. I was alone. I almost said no. I almost closed the door and told her to call my attorney. But something in her face, a tightness around her eyes, a hesitation in the way she held her purse against her stomach, made me step aside and let her walk past me into the kitchen. She sat down at the table without being asked. I poured her a glass of water because my mother raised me to offer water to anyone who walked through my door, even someone who had stolen from my children. She didn't drink it. She just wrapped her fingers around the glass and stared at the tabletop while I sat down across from her. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed on the street outside. I could smell her perfume, the same one she'd worn for years, something floral and too sweet. Then I stood up, walked to the hall closet, and pulled down the lockbox. When I came back into the kitchen and set it on the table between us, Gloria flinched. "I still have the receipt for this," I said. December 7th, 2019. Home Depot, $34.99 plus tax. You were there. Gloria didn't answer. She was staring at the box like it might open on its own. I unlocked it. I lifted the lid. I took out each piece of paper one at a time and laid it flat on the table between us. The grand mutual life letter, the bank statement, the policy documents, the photocopies of the cashed checks with Gloria's signature on the back. I arranged them in a row like I was setting a table for a meal no one wanted to eat. Gloria's hands were still wrapped around the water glass. She hadn't moved. I sat back down, I folded my hands on the table in front of me, and I asked her the one question I had been waiting to ask since April of 2022. "Can you show me the loan documents?" It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just a question spoken in the same voice I used to ask the boys if they'd brushed their teeth. Gloria's jaw tightened. She tried to say something. I saw her mouth open, saw her throat move, but no words came out. She tried again. There weren't documents. It was between me and Rafael. He understood. Show me a bank transfer then, a canceled check, a withdrawal from his account that matches a deposit in yours. Nothing. An email, a text message, a note on a napkin. She looked away, toward the window over the sink, where the morning light was coming through the blinds in thin yellow stripes. Her chin trembled once and then steadied. When she turned back to me, her eyes were wet, but her face was hard. You think you're so clever, she said, with your little box and your little papers. You think that makes you right. I didn't answer that. I just sat there, hands still folded, and let her words hang in the air between us. The refrigerator cycled off. The house went quiet. After a long time, Gloria pushed her chair back. The legs scraped against the tile floor. She stood up, picked up her purse, and walked out of my kitchen without another word. The front door opened and closed. Her car started in the driveway and pulled away. I stayed at the table for a while, looking at the papers spread out in front of me. Then I gathered them up, one by one, and put them back in the lockbox. I closed the lid. I turned the key. That was the last time Gloria Vasquez ever set foot in my house. 2 weeks later, her attorney called Diane Okonkwo and said they wanted to discuss a settlement. Diane called me at work, and I stepped into an empty exam room to take the call. She told me the number. It was less than the full amount, but not by much, and it came with a condition. Gloria would sign a document acknowledging that the loans had never existed.
She's admitting it, Diane said. On paper, signed and notarized. I leaned against the exam table and looked at the eye chart on the opposite wall. EFPTOZ. Letters that meant nothing unless you could read them in order. Take it, I said, and she did. The box from Diane's office arrived on a Tuesday. I opened it at the kitchen table while the kettle cooled. Inside, the signed and notarized letter, the original policy documents, copies of every check Gloria had endorsed, and one extra thing, a photograph of my husband from the insurance file, the one he'd submitted when we first took out the policy. 31 years old, hair too long, grinning like he knew something the camera didn't.
I pinned it to the corkboard next to the calendar. Gloria never called to explain. I didn't expect her to. People who rewrite history don't sit down for a second draft with you, but I had the paper now, the dates, the signatures, the sequence no one could scramble. Sometimes being believed starts with believing yourself. I was right, and I could prove it. That's my story. If this reminded you to trust your own memory or to keep the record when no one believes you, take that as your sign. If you know someone who needs to hear it, share this, drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.